The Battle of Little Bighorn, also known as Custer's Last Stand, stands as one of the most iconic yet controversial events in American history. The events that unfolded on June 25, 1876, have sparked endless fascination and debate, with historians, military strategists, and enthusiasts alike attempting to untangle the web of decisions, actions, and circumstances that led to the annihilation of the 7th Cavalry. The very fabric of this historical moment is laced with intrigue. Every movement, every decision, every moment of hesitation contributed to the fatal outcome. As we delve deeper into the minutiae of the battle, one thing becomes clear. History, as we know it, is often a mosaic of facts, interpretations, and in some cases, misconceptions. What we think we know about Little Bighorn is constantly evolving, shaped by new discoveries, varying perspectives, and the inevitable blur between fact and fiction. To fully appreciate the events of that fateful day, it is essential to first understand the broader context in which the Battle of Little Bighorn occurred. The mid-19th century in America was a period of rapid expansion and conflict. With the discovery of gold in the Black Hills of South Dakota, previously guaranteed to the Sioux by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, tensions between the U.S. government and Native American tribes, particularly the Sioux and Cheyenne, escalated to a boiling point. The Black Hills held not only material wealth, but also deep spiritual significance for the Native Americans. The U.S. government's attempt to force tribes onto reservations and away from their ancestral lands was met with fierce resistance, leading to a series of confrontations. The Great Sioux War of 1876–77 became inevitable as the U.S. military sought to suppress Native American resistance to their displacement. Among the U.S. forces was the 7th Cavalry, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, a controversial figure known for his boldness in battle, but also his overconfidence. This overconfidence would become one of the critical factors leading to the devastating defeat at Little Bighorn. Custer's reputation as a fearless, audacious leader played a major role in shaping the events leading up to the battle. By 1876, he had become a figure known for his willingness to take risks, often underestimating the capabilities of his adversaries. His experience in the Civil War had earned him both fame and infamy, and his reputation as a fearless commander often overshadowed the fact that his decisions were sometimes reckless. One of the key debates surrounding the Battle of Little Bighorn is whether Custer's leadership ultimately doomed the 7th Cavalry. Was his decision to split his forces into 3 separate columns under his direct command, as well as under Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Gerard, a calculated risk or a catastrophic miscalculation? On the morning of June 25, 1876, as Custer led his men into the valley of the Little Bighorn River, he believed that his forces would be facing a relatively small number of Native American warriors. However, unbeknownst to him, the Native American coalition, consisting of Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors, was far larger than expected, with an estimated 2,000 to 3,000 warriors ready to defend their way of life. While much of the historical narrative around the Battle of Little Bighorn focuses on Custer and the 7th Cavalry, it is equally important to recognize the formidable leadership displayed by the Native American forces. Sitting Bull, a respected Sioux leader, had a profound influence on the battle's outcome, not just as a military strategist, but also as a spiritual leader. In the days leading up to the battle, Sitting Bull conducted a sun dance ceremony where he had a vision of soldiers falling into their camp like grasshoppers. This vision was interpreted as a premonition of a great victory, strengthening the resolve of the Native American warriors. Another key figure was Crazy Horse, a fearless Lakota war leader known for his tactical brilliance. Unlike Custer, whose leadership was often flashy and ego-driven, Crazy Horse's approach was marked by careful coordination and an acute understanding of guerrilla warfare. On the day of the battle, Crazy Horse's ability to inspire and direct his warriors played a pivotal role in overwhelming Custer's forces. Historians continue to scrutinize the precise timing and movements of the 7th Cavalry during the battle, as even the slightest delay or misjudgment in the heat of battle can prove disastrous. The regiment's departure from Busby Camp and their subsequent positioning at critical points like Halt 1 have been the subject of extensive analysis. The time at which Major Reno launched his attack on the southern end of the Native American camp and Custer's decision to advance further north remains central to understanding how events unfolded. Custer's decision to press forward and split his forces into smaller units has been interpreted by some as a tactical error, while others argue that he was simply following standard military procedure for encircling an enemy. Yet, in this instance, Custer underestimated the scale and strength of the Native American forces, leading to catastrophic consequences. Whether Custer remained with his men during critical junctures or scouted ahead alone is a detail, shrouded in mystery, but what is clear is that his decision-making on that day created a series of events from which there was no turning back. By the time Custer and his men realized the true scale of the Native American resistance, it was too late. The warriors, led by Crazy Horse, Gall, and others, launched a coordinated counterattack against the disjointed cavalry units. Major Reno's assault on the southern end of the encampment quickly faltered, and he was forced to retreat, suffering significant casualties. Meanwhile, Custer's portion of the 7th Cavalry became isolated on a ridge now known as Last Stand Hill. The surrounding terrain offered little in the way of cover or escape routes, leaving Custer and his men exposed to a fierce onslaught from the Native American warriors. What ensued was a brutal fight for survival, as the 7th Cavalry was quickly overwhelmed by the superior numbers and tactics of their adversaries. Eyewitness accounts from surviving Native American warriors paint a vivid picture of the chaos that unfolded during the final moments of Custer's last stand. Warriors described a relentless assault on the surrounded cavalrymen, who fought desperately until the very end. Some reports suggest that Custer himself was one of the last men standing, fighting with both a pistol and a saber in a futile attempt to stave off defeat. The aftermath of the Battle of Little Bighorn sent shockwaves through the United States. News of Custer's defeat was met with disbelief and anger, with many Americans struggling to comprehend how a seasoned military commander and his troops could be so completely decimated by Native American forces. In the days following the battle, a contingent of U.S. soldiers arrived at the scene, where they found the bodies of Custer and his men strewn across the battlefield. Many of the dead had been stripped of their uniforms and weapons, and some had been mutilated, a reflection of the deep-seated animosity that had built up between the Native Americans and the U.S. military. For the Native Americans, the victory at Little Bighorn was a moment of profound triumph, but it was also short-lived. In the months and years that followed, the U.S. government redoubled its efforts to subjugate the Plains tribes, leading to further displacement, hardship, and the eventual confinement of many Native Americans to reservations. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, two of the most prominent leaders in the fight against U.S. forces, would both meet tragic ends within a few years of the battle. Sitting Bull was killed by Indian police in 1890, while Crazy Horse was fatally wounded while in U.S. custody in 1877. The legacy of Little Bighorn endures to this day, both as a symbol of Native American resistance and as a cautionary tale of military hubris. For the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho people, the battle remains a source of pride, representing a rare victory in their long struggle to defend their lands and way of life. For the U.S. military, the battle is remembered as one of the most infamous defeats in its history, a stark reminder of the perils of underestimating one's enemy. The story of the Battle of Little Bighorn has been shaped by countless interpretations, both in the years immediately following the event and in the decades since. Some view Custer as a tragic hero, undone by forces beyond his control, while others see him as an arrogant and reckless commander who led his men to their deaths. Similarly, Native American leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse have been mythologized, their roles in the battle often exaggerated or misunderstood by popular culture. In the realm of historical scholarship, the debate over Little Bighorn continues to this day. Archaeologists, historians, and military experts have analyzed the battlefield and pored over first-hand accounts to piece together a clearer picture of what happened on June 25, 1876. Yet, despite these efforts, many aspects of the battle remain shrouded in mystery. The exact sequence of events, the motivations behind key decisions, and even the final moments of Custer's life are still the subject of speculation. One of the most enduring myths surrounding the battle is the idea that Custer and his men fought to the last man in a valiant final stand. While it is true that the 7th Cavalry was overwhelmed by superior numbers, there is evidence to suggest that some soldiers may have attempted to flee or surrender in the face of certain defeat. This version of events, however, has often been downplayed or ignored in favor of a more romanticized narrative. The Battle of Little Bighorn remains one of the most studied and debated events in American history, not just for its military significance, but for what it represents in the broader narrative of U.S. Native American relations. It was a moment when two worlds collided, with devastating consequences for both sides. For the U.S. military, it was a lesson in the dangers of underestimating one's enemy, while for the Native American tribes, it was a fleeting victory in their long struggle against the forces of colonization. Today, the battlefield at Little Bighorn stands as a national monument, a place where visitors can reflect on the events of June 25, 1876, and the lives that were lost. It serves as a reminder of the complexities of history and the ways in which myths and legends can sometimes obscure the truth. But beyond the debates and the interpretations, the battle remains a powerful symbol of the clash between two very different cultures and the enduring impact of that clash on the history of the United States. The legacy of the Battle of Little Bighorn is not simply one of defeat or victory, but rather a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. Whether we view the events of that day as a tragedy, a triumph, or something in between, one thing is certain: the story of Little Bighorn will continue to captivate and inspire for generations to come. The Battle of Little Bighorn, one of the most debated and analyzed events in American history, remains shrouded in mystery. It was a turning point not only in the struggle between Native American tribes and the U.S. government, but also in the legacy of General George Armstrong Custer. What exactly happened during those crucial moments leading up to Custer's infamous last stand has puzzled historians for well over a century. Various interpretations have emerged, but questions persist, particularly regarding the movements and decisions made by Custer himself. Central to the discussion are the conflicting accounts of Custer's movements in the moments before the battle. Was he rash, rushing ahead of his troops in a bid to achieve glory? Or did he stay with his regiment, leading them strategically toward the Sioux village? The question of timing, when Custer made certain decisions, where he was at specific points, and how his actions influenced the course of the battle, has become a key focus in the historical analysis. However, this intense scrutiny of timing, though essential for historians trying to piece together the event, may not have been as critical during the actual battle itself. On that fateful day, events unfolded rapidly, driven by a combination of misjudgment, overconfidence, and fierce resistance from the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors. Yet in retrospect, understanding the precise timing of decisions has become crucial in determining why things happened as they did. The challenge of deciphering the truth from the multitude of accounts is compounded by the fact that every participant seemed to experience the battle differently. Each individual perspective brings something unique to the table, yet these varying recollections also muddy the waters. Those who survived, particularly members of Custer's regiment, offered conflicting stories, each with its own biases and interpretations of what transpired. Years later, survivors continued to debate key moments of the battle, often influenced by their own desire to shape how history remembered them. Figures like George Herendine, Fred Gerard, Luke Hare, Charles Varnum, Edward Godfrey, and Wynne Edgerly have been instrumental in providing a window into the events of that day. Their insights, based on first-hand experience, have given historians critical details about the battlefield, Custer's actions, and the overall mood leading up to the encounter. Herendine and Gerard, scouts with intimate knowledge of the terrain, were able to offer a nuanced understanding of the area in which Custer's forces fought. Varnum and Godfrey, both officers, provided accounts that have been indispensable in piecing together the chain of command and how decisions were made on the battlefield. Edgerly, another officer, also contributed to these recollections, though, like many others, his account sometimes wavered between the facts and his need to preserve his legacy. Then, there are the enlisted soldiers like First Sergeant John Ryan, Sergeant Ferdinand Culbertson, and Private Charles Windolph, whose perspectives add another layer to the narrative. These soldiers, men who carried out the orders of their superiors, saw the battle unfold through the eyes of those tasked with executing the broader strategy set by Custer and his officers. Windolph, who later received the Medal of Honor, is one of the most famous survivors, his personal account offering details about the chaos of battle that might otherwise have been lost to history. Ryan and Culbertson also provide valuable testimonies, though their views, like those of their officers, are not without complications. The complexity of these accounts doesn't end with the first-hand narratives of Custer's men. Over the years, other sources have emerged, many of which have cast further doubt on what really happened. For instance, the accounts of William Morris, Peter Thompson, and Theodore Golden, while colorful and intriguing, are known for embellishments that often stretch the bounds of credibility. Morris, a civilian who was present during the battle, painted a dramatic picture of the events, but left historians with little verifiable information. Thompson and Golden, both survivors, presented their own versions of the battle, but like Morris, their accounts often veer into the realm of exaggeration, making it difficult to separate fact from fiction. One of the most controversial figures in the analysis of the battle is Lieutenant Carlo DiRudio. A survivor of the battle, DiRudio's testimony has long fascinated historians due to the level of detail he provided. However, DiRudio's account has been viewed with skepticism because of its frequent shifts between stark honesty and moments where he seemed more concerned with protecting his reputation than telling the unvarnished truth. DiRudio, like many others who survived the battle, was deeply concerned with how history would remember him. His tendency to emphasize his own bravery and downplay his mistakes has left historians questioning the reliability of his testimony. Indeed, DiRudio's account, like those of many other survivors, reflects a broader theme in the aftermath of the Battle of Little Bighorn: the desire for self-preservation. For many who lived through the battle, how they would be remembered became as important as what actually happened. This is why it's so difficult to pinpoint a single narrative that captures the truth of that day. As the years passed, survivors realized that their stories would shape how future generations viewed the battle, and so many of them adjusted their accounts, sometimes subtly, other times more blatantly, to ensure they came out looking like heroes, or at least not as scapegoats for the catastrophic defeat. The broader context of the battle itself must also be considered when analyzing these accounts. The Battle of Little Bighorn didn't occur in a vacuum. It was the result of years of escalating tension between the U.S. government and the Native American tribes of the Great Plains. The government's attempts to confine Native Americans to reservations, coupled with the discovery of gold in the Black Hills, land sacred to the Sioux, set the stage for a violent confrontation. For the Sioux and their allies, the battle was about more than just defeating Custer. It was about defending their land, their way of life, and their sovereignty in the face of overwhelming pressure from the U.S. military. From the Native American perspective, the battle was a significant victory, one that demonstrated their ability to resist U.S. expansion. Leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse became legends, their roles in the battle celebrated by their people and later by historians. The Sioux and Cheyenne warriors who fought at Little Bighorn were not only defending their villages and families, but also making a stand against a much larger force that sought to undermine their very existence. Their bravery and skill in battle, particularly in the face of superior numbers and weaponry, have been a key focus of modern interpretations of the battle. However, even within Native American accounts, there is variation in how the battle is remembered. Some focus on the strategic genius of the leaders, like Crazy Horse, while others highlight the communal effort made by the warriors. Oral traditions passed down through generations have kept the memory of the battle alive. But as with the accounts from Custer's men, these stories are influenced by the perspectives of those telling them. For Native Americans, the Battle of Little Bighorn represents both a moment of triumph and the beginning of the end of their way of life. Despite their victory, the U.S. government's response was swift and brutal, ultimately leading to the defeat of the Sioux and Cheyenne in the months and years that followed. Thus, the Battle of Little Bighorn exists in a strange duality. On the one hand, it was a devastating defeat for Custer and the U.S. military, a moment of reckoning that exposed the vulnerabilities of a force that had long been considered invincible. On the other hand, it was a fleeting victory for the Sioux and their allies, one that, though momentous, could not stop the inevitable push of American expansion into their lands. As historians continue to dissect the events of that day, the mystery surrounding the Battle of Little Bighorn persists. The varying accounts, from Custer's men, from civilians, from Native Americans, all provide pieces of the puzzle, but none offer a complete picture. It is this elusiveness, this inability to fully understand what transpired, that keeps the battle at the forefront of historical inquiry. In the end, the Battle of Little Bighorn is not just a story about military tactics or the clash between Native Americans and the U.S. government. It is a story about memory, about how events are remembered and retold, shaped by those who lived through them and those who seek to understand them. The quest to unravel the truth of Little Bighorn will likely continue for generations. As new interpretations emerge and as historians discover new sources, the story will evolve, but it will always be shaped by the same central question: what really happened during those critical moments? The answer may never be fully known, but that only adds to the enduring allure of one of America's most iconic battles. Fred Benteen remains one of the most polarizing figures in the Battle of Little Bighorn, a battle that has been dissected and debated by historians for decades. His role in that pivotal moment in American history is fraught with controversy. While some consider him a key player who made decisive moves, others see him as a lesser figure whose contributions were minimal or misguided. Benteen's place in the narrative is complicated, not just by his actions, but also by the conflicting accounts that have emerged over time. One such account is that of Frederick Gerard, a man whose involvement in the battle was both significant and enigmatic, and whose portrayal by historians has been equally contentious. Gerard, serving as an interpreter for the Arikara Scouts during the campaign, presents an interesting character study in the history of Little Bighorn. Fred Dustin, a historian known for his meticulous research, cast doubt on the reliability of Gerard's accounts, viewing them with suspicion. Dustin was particularly skeptical of the claims Gerard made regarding his interactions with George Custer, as well as his observations of the battle. However, Dustin's critiques were far from universally accepted. Other historians have defended Gerard, noting his unique position and the complexity of the situation he found himself in. At 46 years old, Gerard was one of the oldest participants in the Little Bighorn campaign, a fact that set him apart from many of his fellow soldiers and scouts. His advanced age for a frontiersman raised questions about his physical fitness and his ability to keep up with the younger men in the company. Moreover, Gerard's skills as a frontiersman and his knowledge of Indian warfare were not universally respected, with some seeing him as out of his depth. Despite his adventurous life, which had undoubtedly given him many experiences on the frontier, there were those who viewed Gerard as impulsive and inexperienced when it came to understanding the complexities of Native American military tactics. One such critic was the historian James Willard, who painted a less than flattering picture of Gerard. Willard claimed that Gerard's report to Custer, which indicated that the Indians were not fleeing but instead preparing to fight, was one of the key factors that led to Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn. This assertion, while bold, is not without merit. Gerard's report, delivered at a crucial moment in the lead-up to the battle, may have influenced Custer's decision-making in a way that sealed the fate of his troops. The timeline of Gerard's observations is still debated, but it is clear that his report was given significant weight, perhaps more so than the reports of more seasoned scouts. The life of Frederick Gerard is as fascinating as his role in the Battle of Little Bighorn. Born in St. Louis, Missouri, on November 14, 1829, Gerard was drawn westward by the allure of the frontier, much like many young men of his generation. In 1848, he began his western adventures, eventually securing a position at Fort Pierre with the American Fur Company, a company that played a significant role in the early development of the American West. By 1855, Gerard had relocated to Fort Berthold, where he would bear witness to some of the most violent confrontations between settlers and Native American tribes. One of the most dramatic episodes in Gerard's life occurred on Christmas Day in 1863. On that day, a group of 600 Sioux warriors laid siege to Fort Berthold, threatening the lives of its inhabitants. Gerard, along with just 17 other men, managed to hold off the attackers until reinforcements could arrive. Gerard's bravery during this siege was further highlighted when, after the initial attack, he spent an additional 10 days alone at the fort, prepared to destroy the post by blowing it up should the Sioux return for a second assault. This act of defiance and courage solidified Gerard's reputation as a man willing to do whatever was necessary to protect his fellow frontiersmen. The siege also added a personal dimension to Gerard's relationship with the Sioux, particularly with the legendary leader Sitting Bull. During the siege, Sitting Bull took possession of Gerard's prized black stallion, an action that deepened the animosity between the two men. From that moment forward, the rivalry between Gerard and Sitting Bull would cast a shadow over Gerard's career, adding an extra layer of tension to his interactions with Native American leaders. As Gerard's career progressed, he continued to find himself in critical roles during some of the most significant events in the history of the American West. In 1872, he became the post interpreter at Fort Abraham Lincoln, a position that placed him at the center of many important military campaigns. One of Gerard's most notable contributions came in 1873 when he saved a surveying party led by Thomas L. Rosser, an old friend of George Custer, from an ambush by hostile Native Americans. Gerard's quick thinking and intimate knowledge of Native American tactics prevented what could have been a devastating attack, further cementing his reputation as a capable and resourceful frontiersman. However, despite his accomplishments, Gerard was not without his detractors. Marcus Reno, a controversial figure in his own right, harbored a deep dislike for Gerard. Reno's issues with Gerard were so pronounced that he eventually had Gerard dismissed from Fort Abraham Lincoln, a move that many viewed as unnecessary and driven by personal animosity rather than by any real shortcomings on Gerard's part. The bad blood between Reno and Gerard would continue long after Gerard's dismissal, with Reno often going out of his way to cast Gerard in a negative light in the years following the Battle of Little Bighorn. Reno's attempts to tarnish Gerard's reputation were not entirely successful, however. Gerard's record as a frontiersman and interpreter spoke for itself, and despite Reno's best efforts, many continued to view Gerard as a capable and courageous figure. The animosity between the two men did little to change the fact that Gerard had played a key role in many of the events leading up to and following the Battle of Little Bighorn, and his contributions to the campaign cannot be dismissed. The story of Frederick Gerard is one of intrigue, adventure, and controversy. From his early days on the frontier to his role in one of the most famous battles in American history, Gerard lived a life that was as complicated as it was exciting. His actions during the Battle of Little Bighorn, particularly his report to Custer, continue to be the subject of much debate among historians. While some view Gerard as a man whose impulsiveness and inexperience contributed to Custer's defeat, others see him as a key figure who provided crucial information at a critical moment. One thing is certain: Frederick Gerard was a man who left his mark on the history of the American West. His experiences on the frontier, his interactions with legendary figures like Sitting Bull, and his role in the Battle of Little Bighorn all contribute to his legacy as one of the most fascinating and controversial figures of his time. Whether viewed as a hero or as a man whose actions had unintended consequences, Gerard's story is one that continues to captivate historians and history enthusiasts alike. In conclusion, the legacy of Frederick Gerard, much like that of Fred Benteen, is one that is fraught with contradictions and complexities. Both men played important roles in the Battle of Little Bighorn, and both have been the subject of much historical debate. Gerard, in particular, stands out for his unique background, his adventurous life, and his controversial actions during the campaign. Whether one views him as a hero or as a flawed individual, there is no denying that Frederick Gerard's life and legacy are integral to the story of the American West. His actions, both on and off the battlefield, continue to be analyzed and debated, ensuring that his place in history remains secure. One of the most interesting aspects of Gerard's involvement in the Battle of Little Bighorn is how his contributions were perceived by key figures like General Terry. While Gerard may have had an inflated sense of his own abilities, his contributions were highly valued by some. After the battle, when Gerard returned to Fort Lincoln, General Terry publicly praised him for his early assessments of the Indian forces. According to Charles Varnum, Terry even wrote a letter to Gerard expressing his regret for not heeding his warnings sooner. This endorsement speaks volumes about Gerard's importance during the campaign, even if his occasional self-promotion sometimes overshadowed his contributions. The movements of the 7th Cavalry on the morning of June 25th remain one of the most terrifying truths of Navajo Skinwalkers. The Dark Witches of the Southwest recalled that shortly after dawn, the scouts informed Custer that they had spotted the village from the top of the divide. According to Herendine, the command advanced up the creek until they reached its head, then diverted into a ravine for cover. This location was about 3 miles from where they had camped near the head of the creek, with the Indian scouts claiming the village could be seen from the top of the divide. After positioning the command in the ravine, Custer took a few orderlies and rode ahead to see for himself. He remained away for about an hour and, upon returning, claimed he could not see the village. However, the scouts warned him that the regiment had been spotted and that word was being sent back to the Sioux village. Herendine's account, given in a second article 1.5 years later, adds further detail. He stated that after leaving Busby Camp on the night of June 24th, the regiment traveled roughly 10 miles, though in reality, the distance was closer to 6.5, and made camp around 2 a.m. Once the scouts reported the Indian camp's location to Custer, the regiment moved forward at first light. Varnum's account of the events adds even more complexity to the narrative. He wrote that the column reached the trail crossing of the divide at about 10 a.m., at which point Custer joined him. Together, they climbed a bluff where the Indians attempted to point out what they could see. Yet Varnum's later recollections, including a letter written in 1909 to Walter Camp, present a slightly different scenario. After viewing the Little Bighorn Valley and spotting some Sioux, Varnum set out to intercept and engage them, a decision that would have significant consequences later in the battle. As the narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that even the smallest details, whether Custer scolded his brother once or twice, can have significant implications for how we interpret the battle. In some accounts, Custer led the regiment to Crow's Nest and observed the valley before his men arrived. By the time the command halted a second time, Custer had already scouted the area and was preparing for the next phase of action. This sequence of events has led some historians to believe that Custer was well ahead of his men, positioning himself for the upcoming engagement. Yet, conflicting accounts complicate the story. Gerard's testimony at the Reno Inquiry in 1879, 30 years before Varnum's 1909 letter, offers a different perspective. According to Gerard, when the command halted at Davis Creek, the first halt, orders were given to make coffee with small fires, which were to be extinguished once the coffee was ready. The horses were to remain saddled, and the command would camp after daylight. After his coffee, Gerard slept, only to be awakened by Custer, who instructed him to take 2 scouts and accompany him to the lookout. Either Cook or Tom Custer approached the general, asking if the command should move, but Custer's reply was clear: "No, you will stay here until I return." As we examine these differing accounts, we are reminded of the complexity of historical interpretation. The Battle of Little Bighorn is not a story with one clear narrative. Instead, it is a puzzle made up of conflicting accounts, personal biases, and the passage of time, which blurs the lines between fact and fiction. In the end, What we are left with is a story that, like all historical events, is subject to interpretation. As we sift through the various perspectives, we must remember that history is not a static entity. It evolves, shaped by the people who lived it and the historians who study it. In expanding upon this narrative, we must appreciate the human elements that make the Battle of Little Bighorn such a compelling story. It is not just a tale of military strategy and timing, but one of individual courage, rivalry, and the enduring quest for truth. The characters who populate this story, from Custer to Gerard, are complex and multifaceted, their motivations as varied as the accounts they left behind. As we delve deeper into this story, we are reminded that history is not just about what happened, but how we choose to remember it.